Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, a potential PNM merger comes with the promise of a renewable future. But what do we really know about the utility's potential new partner?
If I'm in New Mexico, I would want to ask Avangrid, how are you going to guarantee that you understand our specific energy needs?
Plus, making the case both for and against a new downtown Albuquerque multi-use stadium, which would be home to the New Mexico United soccer team. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. We've invited a group of 4 individuals to make their case for and against that stadium proposal, and we'll sprinkle those opinions throughout the show this week. The Line Opinion panel will also discuss a potential return of double dipping for retired police officers as a way to combat the state's ongoing crime wave. And the panelists discuss what safety changes may be in store for the film industry after a tragic shooting on the set of the film Rust involving actor Alec Baldwin. But we start tonight with some last thoughts and predictions from the line ahead of Tuesday's trip to the polls. We're just 4 days away from gluing our eyes to our phones and our televisions waiting for the results in next week's elections. 2 mayoral seats in the state's 2 largest cities, education funding, and a divisive stadium bond proposal are all up for a vote. Let's bring in the line panel this week, starting with regular Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group Public Relations Company. We also welcome back to our Zoom roundtable former State Senator Eric Riego. Always good to have Eric. And joining us again this week is Rebecca Latham. She is CEO of the Girl Scouts of New Mexico and former head of the New Mexico Tourism Department under Governor Susana Martinez. Welcome to you all. The Albuquerque mayor's race has captured a lot of headlines in the last couple of weeks. This includes recent polling from the Albuquerque Journal that shows incumbent Mayor Tim Keller with a sizable lead over his challengers, Bernalillo County Sheriff Manny Gonzalez and talk radio host Eddie Aragon. With more than 50% of the vote according to that poll, do Keller's challengers have a chance to take out a big enough chunk to force a runoff? Eric, let me start with you on that question. Is that actually going to be happening here? We've got 4 days to go. What do you see as possible for the challengers?
Well, I think if Keller's folks show up, he's in good shape. I mean, sadly, the race has taken some pretty dark turns in the last couple of weeks. I think that not just the polling that we saw from the Journal, but the kind of endorsements you really see some pretty heavy hitters rallying around the mayor, including the governor and now Attorney General Balderas. So it's clear they're trying to send a clear signal that he's the Democrat, even though this is a nonpartisan race. I think Manny Gonzalez has just sort of his descent into the gutter on personal stuff has just really tanked any chance he had of forcing a runoff. I think his strategy was to try to take the mayor down a notch, to try to get in a runoff with him, and then maybe somehow, kind of a Hail Mary effort for him to win in a runoff. But I think he really blew it. At the end of the day, I think most folks just want to see a credible, competent person running the office. And given how this campaign has gone, whether you love Keller or not, I think it's been clear that if you can't run a credible campaign, as both Manny and Aragon have shown, that's like neither one has really run that strong a campaign. How are you going to run a major American city? So I think Keller's in good shape. His people got to show up though. So I hope folks don't think that it's kind of over because there could still be a runoff if Keller's kind of folks don't show up.
Right. Hey, Rebecca, of course, the senator mentioned Mr. Gonzalez's unsubstantiated accusations against Mayor Keller during that KOB debate. His last-ditch effort to tighten the gap. Follow up, if you would, about what Eric just mentioned. What is he going to get out of this in the last week or less than a week to go here?
I'm still, I think, scratching my head about that tactic. I think that the sheriff's better approach would have been to try and dismantle the reputation of Aragon. We can never underestimate the ability of a third person to just completely shake everything up and ruin any actual chance for change. I think one thing or two things that the city of Albuquerque, that the constituents agree on are we need to find a solution to our unhoused population, and we need to find a solution to our crime. So if we all agree on the major issues, why can't we agree on, how to fix them? And I just keep looking at that. I keep looking at Eddie and thinking, You know, sometimes when you want change, it means you got to discreetly get out of your own way. And his being in the race really, to me as a voter, showed that he was putting his pride over actual progress. Because if you want change, you've got to actually strategically look at the best way to get there. So frankly, I think Manny probably should have tried to dismantle that approach and try to sway some of those likely Eddie voters back over to him, than to try and damage the mayor's credibility, the current mayor's credibility, over unsubstantiated claims.
That's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point. And Tom, I got to get you in on this. I want to swing north to Santa Fe in a second. But again, for Eddie Aragon and Mr. Gonzalez, pick up on where Rebecca just was. That's actually kind of fascinating. Did he blow the moment, meaning the sheriff, by not going after, the third person?
In a 3-horse race, which I'll just use that analogy for the purposes of our conversation today, both Eric and Rebecca bring up some solid points. I think that Manny and Eddie's approach, Mr. Aragon and Mr. Gonzalez's approach, have really been off, because they've been going for the head on a stick, so to speak, of trying to dethrone an incumbent mayor, which is very difficult. And clearly he's very popular. Whether people agree or don't, people like him other than the other two. So I think that there's a lot that was lost in all of the debates by both Mr. Aragon and Mr. Gonzalez, to not take each other down, to try and build more of a base to force a runoff. Now, because of Mr. Gonzalez's comments during the last debate, which are, I think, the public sentiment is actually reflected in the Albuquerque Journal polling. It's not shaping up real well for either of the two non-incumbents.
Now, let's go to Santa Fe. The already extraordinary fundraising gap between the three candidates is growing even wider. You might have read about this. Incumbent Alan Weber has received more than $440,000, according to the latest finance reports from the city clerk's office. That dwarfs the less than $150,000 raised by Joanne Vigil Koppler, and less than the $20,000 taken in by Alexis Martinez Johnson. It's a big gap. Eric, does money make or break this race? And if it does make it, that doesn't feel very Santa Fe, that, that idea that you can steamroll everybody with a ton of dough. What's your sense of this one?
Well, Santa Fe had a public financing system that really didn't work out too well. It was modeled on the Albuquerque system that we have that actually Mayor Keller is using pretty effectively. One of the reasons why it worked is we changed the law, the voters changed the law, and to really allow for a much more significant investment in public financing. If you believe we got to take some of the big money, the development money, and the special interest money out of local elections, then you got to have an alternative. In Albuquerque, there is an alternative. The mayor, $600,000 plus in public funding, didn't have to make a bunch of calls to people who want business with the city. But in Santa Fe, unfortunately, they couldn't ever figure out how to get their system to work and to be substantial enough for people to run credibly. So, Alan Weber is a longtime nationally known, Fast Company founder, a business guy, but also super progressive, like the electorate in Santa Fe. So yes, he raised a lot of money. I also think a lot of people just see him as, again, not unlike the Keller race, as the most competent person in the race. They may not love him. They may think he's made a couple of mistakes, but overall, he comes across, and he's governed as a pretty competent, progressive, thoughtful guy, and he's benefiting from the same thing I think Keller is, which is both of his opponents are not running great races, and neither one of them seems to have a clear message other than I'm not the incumbent, right? Alexis Martinez Johnson is just this is her third or fourth time running, and just not very effective campaign. And then his main opponent from the council, Joanne Koppler Vigil, is really, she's all over the board. She opposed mask mandates, and then she's really kind of fought some real basic real estate reform as a realtor. So I think both Keller and Weber share a common thread, which is they're progressive, they're competent, and they're running against really bad candidates.
Interesting point there. Got to get in the stadium bond here, guys. The measure has become the most talked about proposal on any ballot around the state. Another recent poll from the Journal shows more than half of voters are opposed, and only about 37% are in favor. What's especially interesting is nearly everyone has made up their mind already, with 3% saying it depends and 4% saying they're undecided. Tom, did the city fumble this, and how soon before they take another crack at getting a stadium some other way if the voters do turn it down?
Well, yeah, it's clear that there's, everybody thought there was going to be a bandwagon. It turned out to be more of a red flyer as far as the New Mexico United team. Very good team, well-run franchise. The timing just, I don't think, was right, and that's what's reflected, I think, in the polling numbers that we're seeing in the Albuquerque Journal. Question is what's going to happen on election day? It all depends on who shows up. But I think, in addition to Mayor Keller's reelection, that the city council and probably the mayor's office will end up finding another way to fund the New Mexico United Stadium, and hopefully when that's done, it's something that takes all communities into consideration.
Rebecca, the United folks, I think they're just under $1 million in their particular bucket of money to spend around the market. I just 37% after 850,000 plus, and just what didn't connect here? Something didn't quite connect.
I was speaking to someone earlier about this, and I asked that very question, like, what is it that you're not, that is driving your opposition to this? And the statement was the specific figure, 280 full-time jobs, and the question of, is that realistic? And to the person who I was speaking with, they said, if I can't trust that particular statement, 280 full-time jobs, because I think somewhere I read that the average professional soccer team employs 75 people. So 280 full-time year-round jobs. So the person said, if I can't trust that figure, I don't trust any of it. All of it seems shady because I don't know where they're going to come up with those 280 jobs. Overall, though, regardless of how this goes, I think it's really important that we as a community, number one, realize that if this doesn't pass now, or if this doesn't happen now, that doesn't mean it's never going to happen. It just means that this isn't the right time for it for our community. The other thing we need to realize, because I think there's that, well, if we don't support United, they'll leave. I think we have to do a better job at supporting that organization. Everything that United has done for Albuquerque and for New Mexico has been amazing. I mean, I don't even like soccer, and I've got New Mexico United apparel and stickers and posters in my house. So they are such what they bring to us as a community is so good. We've got to continue to nurture that and grow that and get it to a point where, again, if the stadium doesn't happen now, how do we get it to where it's that it's more organic and that everybody feels better about it?
Eric, real quick, we're just short on time. 50% of the folks also are not crazy about the locations, particularly Borellis. Did we mess that up by narrowing it to these two locations?
Well, I don't think that feasibility study was carried out very well, but I think it's the same problem. And I actually agree with Rebecca on this. They took this very much jobs, construction focused. I don't think that was the right message. I mean, their brand has been bringing us together. We've got huge, crime problems. I think if they would have leaned into that Unidos message, that we're united, this is a way for us to really come together, they might have had a shot. In any year, $50 million bond for a private, publicly owned but privately run stadium is a tough ask. But I really think they made a bad call when they decided to lean into to try to get the Republican conservative voters who are not going to support this kind of bond anyway. And they really should have made it play for the younger folks, for the folks who are on the fence. People like me who live in Borellis who say, well, it depends. If you're really willing to bring community into this and you really want to sort of make some change at the community level and bring this together, then I'm open to the idea. But if the play is going to be to fans only, to sort of business folks only, to chambers of commerce only,
thank you,
then that just isn't a good message. I got a ton of those mailers, and they were just not that convincing.
It was a political campaign instead of a hearts and minds campaign. It's unfortunate.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Exactly right. Hey, be sure to join us here at New Mexico PBS for election night analysis, and we'll catch back up with the line in less than 5 minutes with their thoughts on the tragedy involving Eric Baldwin on the set of Rust. But first, more on that proposal to build a new soccer stadium in Albuquerque we're just talking about. Throughout today's show, we're going to hear from community leaders and organizers with firsthand perspective. First, we reached out to the team at the center of this, New Mexico United, to see how it plans on accomplishing the economic and community goals Rebecca mentioned. It says will be possible with a new stadium. They put us in touch with a young woman who was a part of this initiative early on and sees it as a way to move the city forward.
My name is Cindy Nava. I'm a former DACA recipient, a longtime organizer and policy advocate, a small business owner, and a new U.S. citizen as of February 22nd of this year. My lived experiences have shaped my work and the lens I see life through. I came to New Mexico when I was 7 years old from Chihuahua, Mexico. Growing up as an undocumented immigrant was by no means an easy task. However, I always felt lucky to live in a state like New Mexico, which allowed me to break many of the barriers I was faced with. We are all shaped by our upbringing, and I am no different. My progressive values run deep, born out of living in the injustices rooted so deeply in U.S. immigration policies. As someone who has advocated for issues that affect our communities each and every day, I speak from a place of lived experience that has led with advocacy for change that supports and benefits our communities as a whole. I believe the stadium bond deserves our support on November 2nd. New Mexico United does things differently, and the stadium bond follows the same path. Last year, I met with United about hosting a citizenship event at a match to bring attention to the groundbreaking work and contributions that immigrants make each and every day across our state. This month, that idea became a reality, and I had the pleasure of participating in that ceremony, welcoming 50 new Americans on the field during a United game. This on the shoulders of games where New Mexico United celebrated and promoted Black Lives Matter and Pride. This action to me was more than a statement. It was the enactment of the conversations we had turned into action with the broader purpose of representation and inclusion that opens and expands opportunities to be innovative if given the opportunity to make this stadium a reality. As someone who grew up in Albuquerque, surrounded by soccer diehards, and one who has seen the deep impact of United playing a foundational role in bringing together our diverse and multicultural communities under the premise of Somos Unidos, there is an intangible quality too. The stadium will bring extensive opportunities for creative and culturally competent engagement with communities that are not always brought to the table. Communities such as the ones I grew up in and deeply understand. It will create an affordable family activity where we can gather, have fun, celebrate birthdays and graduations, and this is our opportunity to reimagine and redefine what the stadium could be and what it could bring to our state. An opportunity to expand its multi-use abilities, to serve our communities through collaborative efforts that provide resources, food drives, open park access, blood drives, citizenship ceremonies, health fairs, and so much more.
When people are talking about Avangrid, they're usually talking about it through the perspective of the corridor, about how this company doesn't care about its share, about the main customers, because they're such a small percentage of their earnings overall. There's no guarantee that they're going to have your best interest in mind when it comes to this.
New Mexico is currently in the national entertainment industry spotlight, but for a tragic reason you all know about. It was a week ago we learned that actor Alec Baldwin had accidentally shot and killed a cinematographer on the set of his new film Rust. Shooting at the Bonanza Creek Ranch near Santa Fe, of course. The director was also injured, but he's recovering. In the days since, there's been a lot of reporting on the safety and workplace conditions on sets. And just yesterday, we got an update on the investigation from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, among other things. Investigators have established a live round was fired from the prop gun, and criminal charges are still a possibility in this case. Rebecca, we're still waiting to hear if below-the-line film workers also will ratify a new agreement over workplace conditions after a near strike 2 weeks ago. But this tragedy really highlights some of the issues wrapped up in those negotiations. So the question has to be asked, are film sets in New Mexico going to be fundamentally safer? Can they be fundamentally safer? If not, why? Why not?
Well, I think we have to be very careful about making this a New Mexico issue versus making this a film industry standard.
Excellent point.
The film industry absolutely needs to adopt more safety standards, because this is the most horrific tragedy. I think where we have to be really careful about is if we make it a New Mexico issue. You know, once the governor gets involved, once the legislature gets involved, we make it if we make it any harder to shoot in New Mexico, are we biting the hand that feeds us? Like, I just feel like, accidents, horrible accidents, this is definitely, someone was negligent here. Multiple people appear to have been negligent. I just don't think this can be something that we stand up first and say, well, this is what New Mexico is going to do. I do feel like the governor said, if the film industry doesn't do something, then we will get involved. But at this point, I still would say, let's hold off a little bit and see how the industry works it out amongst themselves.
Hey, Tom, the idea that we know now that live rounds were all over the set and, would be on a set, this seems unfathomable in so many ways. Investigators are trying to establish, in fact, if those same firearms were used by crew members to target shoot during downtimes. It sounds like they did, from what we're gleaning. What sorts of safety changes, can come out of this industry-wide, as Rebecca was saying? Is there anything that the industry can do versus the political side?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of leeway that has been given to the film industry, because a lot of us, we just don't understand what the industry is all about. We, pay our admission to go see the movie. We're entertained, right, and we think it's pretty cool when the stars, come into town and stuff. But as far as the actual how a movie is produced, I think we've all learned a little bit more about the role of an armorer, about the role of cinematographers, and hopefully we should have learned more about it under different circumstances, but now these are the circumstances that we have. And I think that, the industry, it's really on the industry to say, okay, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to, make sure that the government doesn't come in, whether it's California, whether it's New Mexico or Georgia, the industry really has to decide how they're going to change things. And if they don't, then that's where we're going to start to see, I'm sure, different states coming up with different standards, of which, as Rebecca had indicated, could have really devastating effects on an industry that generated $525 million, into New Mexico's economy during 2019.
And even more last year, by the way. It bumped up to 630 million, last year.
It is a huge industry, and it's a tremendous tragedy. And unfortunately, because of where it happened, New Mexico and how New Mexico handles this is now under the spotlight. So I think that the governor did a good job of deflecting it, of saying, hey, we're going to look to the industry first. So that way the state doesn't take the hit, because this really could have happened anywhere.
Tom, let me stay with you on this. You mentioned the press deal that's up there. It's unbelievable the amount of cameras that were at the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department and also for the district attorney up there to hear them speak. How are we doing on that front? Are we presenting ourselves here in New Mexico well in this international moment that's very stressful and very difficult?
Well, it's very difficult to say what that definition of well is, because the subject matter, the sheriff's office, the DA, everybody's going through an investigative process, and so what I like about what I'm seeing is that they're having a regular updates to the media. They're not cutting any side deals. You're not seeing, any investigators or anybody from the sheriff's office kind of leaking information out. The state has been very quiet. Anything that has possibly been leaking out has been leaking out from the cast and crew of the show Rust. So New Mexico as a whole, I'd have to say, is doing as well as it can right now with the media response, just by blocking and tackling, taking care of the things, having regular briefings, answering questions directly, letting them know what that process is.
Hey, Eric, we've heard from a lot of people, including recently in a Facebook Live I did with IATSE Local 480 union members, that productions bring in crew from all over and call them local. Are you worried about this situation puts a dark shadow over our local film workforce? I mean, as Rebecca mentioned, the armorer is from out of state. I don't know if the AD is from out of state, but everyone's assuming everyone involved is from New Mexico. Do you see where I'm going here? It's a difficulty. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I haven't heard that there's sort of like, those, the New Mexico crews are a bunch of yahoos. But I want to get back to both what Rebecca and Tom said.
Sure.
Look, we built this industry from scratch with public dollars. Let's be clear about that. There's hundreds of millions of dollars in investment in this industry that we built it from scratch. So I think it's absolutely critical that in addition to supporting the industry, to making sure it's safe, that the workplaces are safe, that it's incumbent on us to say, look, we're going to continue to make New Mexico a really hospitable place for film. And we're going to expect that these folks getting these pretty massive subsidies are adhering to the highest standards for their workforce. And so I actually think it's a missed opportunity for our political leaders to say, well, let's not do anything to scare them off. I mean, because the $200 or $300 million we've invested so far is not worth it. So I actually think this is a moment for not just New Mexico crews, because we've also worked hard to build New Mexico crews. We didn't have enough crews before.
That's right.
We invested a ton of money at CNM and other places to really build out. So we have a reputation now for having some pretty solid crews. So I don't think that's going to spill over onto the individual New Mexicans. I think it's really going to be, honestly, it's about the productions. Are you going to do a better job of making sure that these productions are safe, including folks like Alec Baldwin, who was a producer in this show. So I think he doesn't have personal responsibility. That was not his fault what happened with the gun, but he is in charge of the whole overall production, and the folks in charge need to do a better job of holding everybody accountable, including who they hire, including how weapons are handled on the set, including like how they vet people. There's a lot of things that went wrong in this particular case. Good
points there. Hey, Rebecca, do you think this death in investigation especially will impact the ratification for that new agreement I mentioned earlier with the below-the-line film workers here? Might this situation put that in jeopardy, possibly?
I'm not intimately familiar with where the negotiations are now and how those workers are. I'm not very familiar with the situation, but I would say that this certainly, this makes their point. If they're concerned, or we've heard about on this particular set about the concern over safety and the corners being cut and how these workers walked off the set because they needed to make their point very clear that they didn't feel it was safe. We all know, you can have, there's that triangle. It can be fast and cheap, but it won't be good. It can be good and fast, but it won't be cheap. So they were trying to make something good. They were trying to make something fast and cheap, and then the standards aren't good. So I think this really kind of plays to that point. We all have to do a better job at protecting. It's this public industry. This is public investment in this industry. We got to protect it, and then really just hear those concerns, and then do whatever we can to help find a good compromise.
Good points there. We'll have more on the fallout from the tragedy on the Rust set on our Facebook page, including a discussion on liabilities and accountability with UNM law professor Sherry Burr. We encourage you to give that a watch if you haven't already. Now to our second speaker tonight on the Albuquerque Stadium bond measure. The issue has brought about some strong opinions, and for people living in neighborhoods where the stadium could be built, it's become personal. A group of those concerned citizens came together to form Stop the Stadium campaign. Their intentions are self-explanatory, centered around the fear a new stadium could turn their home into a place they no longer recognize.
Hi, I am Ramona Malchinsky. I grew up in Albuquerque and am a graduate student and teaching assistant at the University of New Mexico. On Saturday, I voted against the stadium bond, and I urge all Albuquerque voters to do the same. Millionaire team owners and developers would profit from the proposed stadium, and the public would get decades of debt. The majority of people in Albuquerque think we have other priorities. On one side are millionaires spending huge sums of money to trick the public with advertising. On the other side are volunteer, working-class residents like me fighting gentrification. This is David versus Goliath. So far, millionaire team owners have spent nearly $1 million on ads to trick us. They spent $330,000 in just 10 days in October, selling the stadium as a tool for economic and social revitalization. However, virtually all studies of the impacts of publicly funded stadiums show that stadiums have little to no positive impact on local economies. On the other hand, luxury stadiums drastically increase rent and property taxes, not just in the surrounding neighborhoods, but in the entire city. Sports stadiums like these are a tool for gentrification, pushing out long-term working-class residents so real estate developers and team owners can profit. We do not want that to happen in Albuquerque's historic neighborhoods. We know that the way to improve our city is through more funding for education, affordable housing, and other social services that would address homelessness, child welfare, hunger, and crimes of poverty at their roots. No money should be spent on a sports stadium when any Albuquerque resident faces poverty, hunger, and homelessness. We need those $50 million spent on helping our neighbors now, not tied up in building a stadium. Plus, we do not want to see anyone pushed out of their homes, which is exactly what will happen because there is a statewide prohibition on local rent control and thousands are facing eviction due to the economic crisis caused by the pandemic. Despite the lies from Trevisani and others behind the stadium proposals, even a community benefits agreement does not protect Albuquerque residents from gentrification. The city's CBA lawyer, Julian Gross, stated in a virtual town hall that CBAs do not stop gentrification and displacement. In addition, our tax dollars would be used to pay this $50 million loan, but while the city would own the stadium, the binding letter of intent between the city and New Mexico United states that the team would own and control all revenues from the stadium and pay a fraction of that in rent. Finally, the majority of residents in Albuquerque's historic neighborhoods do not want the stadium. They do not want increased housing costs, traffic, and outside development that will transform their neighborhoods forever. No matter where the stadium would be built, though, we know that it is an attempt to begin to change Albuquerque into a city for the wealthy and elite. This stadium will not benefit working people and is a step in the direction of losing communities that define the city we love. Albuquerque, vote against the stadium bond.
We're on track to lose close to 200 officers this year. So our attrition rate is higher than our graduation rate, getting folks into the academy. It's not a money issue. They're not retiring because of money. So by offering them more money to come back, they're not coming back. That's not going to change anything.
I'm Laura Paskus. New Mexicans are facing some potentially big changes when it comes to our electrical utility. That's because there's a merger being worked out between PNM Resources and Avangrid, the U.S. subsidiary of a Spanish power company. How that will play out and what the consequences might be remain to be seen. But I checked in recently with Caitlin Andrews, a reporter for the Bangor Daily News. Avangrid has been in Maine for more than a decade, and the company has not been without controversy. So here in New Mexico, there's a planned multi-billion-dollar merger between PNM Resources and Avangrid. PNM has operated as a monopoly the state's electric utility for decades, and Avangrid is the US-based subsidiary of a Spanish power company. Now, this is all still playing out here in New Mexico, but in Maine, in 2008, Avangrid bought Central Maine Power. When the company was coming to Maine, what are some of the things that they promised? And Caitlin, what have people seen happen over the past 14 years?
Well, I guess I should say to start, the way that it actually came about was that Iberdrola bought Energy East, which Central Maine Power was a subsidy of in 2008, and then in 2015 Iberdrola bought this other company called UIL Holdings. They merged them together in their network division, which created Avangrid. So Avangrid was birthed in 2015, and CMP just ended up being something underneath that. And I believe the idea was that merging them together would create more reliability, would create more dependable customer services, and it would create a stronger utility altogether. And some of the challenges that have come up since then, you can make an argument, well, at least like the state found very recently, could have sprung from the Avangrid merger. They released an audit that has been 3 years in the making with Liberty Consulting Group this year that found that Avangrid itself is not a bad company, but it has really struggled since the merger to be able to provide customer service, largely because it has been cutting or limiting some of its resources to meet its earning expectations. The challenge that happened from that was that it created staffing fluctuations, with staff sometimes being cut and then sometimes being restored, which created an uneven expectation of customer service reliability. That investigation really sprang out of some scandal that came out in October 2017 when there was a windstorm where some people lost power for at least a week, and then they received some high bills afterwards, which later led to the Public Utilities Commission in Maine finding that CMP needed to compensate its customers for billing them when they experienced high outages.
Interesting. So recently, Representative Seth Berry, a Maine lawmaker, he wrote an op-ed that was published pretty widely here in New Mexico, warning the state against the merger. Is the company this unpopular in Maine?
Well, certainly, I think any conversation about Avangrid is really a reflection of CMP. You know, that's the local utility. That's the one people are more familiar with. You really see Avangrid coming up in the conversation around the New England Clean Energy Connect, which is a hydropower corridor that is going to bring hydropower electricity down through Maine into Massachusetts and also into the regional grid. But, you know, it's happening to fulfill a bid Massachusetts put out to fulfill its renewable energy goals. So when people are talking about Avangrid, they're usually talking about it through the perspective of the corridor, about how this company doesn't care about its share, about the main customers, because they're such a small percentage of their earnings overall. There's no guarantee that they're going to have your best interest in mind when it comes to this.
So one of the things that Representative Berry wrote about in his sort of warning to New Mexicans, he mentioned that there's a bill that the Maine legislature has passed to revoke Avangrid's monopoly and replace Central Maine Power with a nonprofit consumer-owned utility. He also wrote that the bill is supported by 75% of Mainers, and that if it became law, it would save ratepayers $9 billion in the first 30 years. And accelerate the state's transition to renewable energy. Based on your reporting, is this accurate information? Is this an accurate assessment?
Well, I can't quite speak to how, I guess, widespread favorability is for the concept of consumer-owned utility. I would actually say that I don't know that a lot of people know what it would do, but I do know that there was a study that came out that if a consumer-owned utility happened, which in Maine, the concept here is that it would create a nonprofit that would basically then float a bond in order to buy out CMP and Versant Power, which are the two biggest utilities in the state. You know, there's a lot of questions about whether they would be able to sell, and there's actually a competing referendum trying to stop that. But there was a study that came out that said initially rates would increase for the first few years, but then eventually that customers would see possible rate decreases over time.
Here in New Mexico, PNM Resources is like a political powerhouse. You know, have a great deal of influence in the legislature and over state government. I'm curious, in terms of political influence, kind of what the situation is with CMP and Avangrid in Maine.
Well, certainly CMP and Avangrid have not been shy about flexing some political money around this referendum. The referendum spending altogether is between this one and the first one that was actually struck down for constitutional purposes is over $62 million. And within this quarter alone, Avangrid spent $8.7 million giving to Clean Energy Matters. A lot of that has been spending on, you know, like ads and mailers, and you know, you can make an argument about how useful those can be in a political season, but it's certainly a ways that people like to flex their political forces. They have very powerful influence in Augusta. They have some of the most high-paid lobbying firms that worked to defeat the consumer-owned utility bill. I cannot speak specifically to some of the other bills that they reference on, but that one they were definitely very vocal and very present in.
I'm curious, what questions do you think that people should be asking Avangrid right now to hold the company accountable if the merger goes through and into the future?
So one of the things that really stood out to me in this audit, the Liberty Consulting Group, was when they really just kind of explained how big Avangrid is. You know, it said that its force, which I assume means its workforce, exceeds 35,000. You know, compared to CMP, which has just over 900 people, made a note of saying that Maine comprises about 20% of U.S. utility operations, but just 2% or so of World Iberdrola utility customers. So if I'm in New Mexico, I would want to ask Avangrid, how are you going to guarantee that you understand our specific energy needs? What are your utility needs? Who are you going to work with to, if there's unsatisfactory customer, like what are you going to do to try to make that better? How well is your understanding of what New Mexico customers need?
Well, Caitlin Andrews, I've really appreciated reading your coverage of utilities in Maine, and I really appreciate you coming on New Mexico in Focus today. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
With so many differing perspectives on the stadium bond issue, some city councilors have had to shift their positions after hearing from the people they represent. Albuquerque City Councilor Brooke Bassan joins us now to explain the decision voters will make and how her stance has changed after her constituents made their opinions known.
My name is Brooke Bassan, and I am an Albuquerque City Councilor for District 4 near the Northeast Heights. I agreed to co-sponsor the legislation that allowed voters to decide if they would like to see the city use $50 million of gross receipts tax revenue bonds to help build a soccer stadium in Albuquerque. The stadium would be home to the New Mexico United and a potential home for other teams down the line. It is said it will revitalize Albuquerque and offer a place for families and residents to gather in support of a team whose goal is greater than just a game. United represents ideals of support, kindness, sportsmanship of all levels, and a true unity of all people. Surprisingly, constituents were very vocal about their lack of support in placing this question on the ballot. A massive majority of phone calls and emails expressed a clear understanding of what was being proposed. Not only did people indicate they were opposed to building a mostly publicly financed stadium, but they were precise in communicating they didn't even want it to be a vote for them to choose. I thought something the size of a $50 million project would be best voted on by the public. Most of my constituents told me they elected me to make this decision for them. For that reason, I ended up voting against placing the question on the ballot, and it ended up passing the City Council on a 7-2 vote. There are pros and cons to building a new soccer stadium. On one hand, it would revitalize part of our city. It would offer more jobs, local business support, economic stimulation, and somewhere for youth and families to engage in a positive activity together. It would be fun, energetic, and invigorating, and it will not raise taxes. On the other hand, it might gentrify neighborhoods. The jobs may only be temporary or seasonal. Attendance might not fill the requested amount of seating, as games at their current field are rarely full. This may lead to less revenue than planned, desired, or necessary for sustainability. Most importantly, there are many other projects throughout all of Albuquerque that are currently planned or being built in phases due to a lack of funding. The refinancing of these bonds could be instead used to finish many of these in the pipeline. Also, the overwhelming priority of our city is clearly a concern about the reduction of crime and what to do to help the unhoused. How might a new stadium assist with this? So now it's in the hands of voters to decide what is in the best interests of the overall community. Early voting is currently underway, and Election Day is November 2nd. Voter registration can occur at most, if not all, voting sites. Among many other very important questions on the ballot, everyone age 18 and above in Albuquerque should go vote to decide if building a new soccer stadium is a priority for them.
Could New Mexico return to a world of double dipping to try and combat the ongoing crime crisis? Retired officer and current state representative Bill Rehm hopes so. He says he's working on legislation that would allow retired law enforcement officers to return to the workforce while still collecting pension benefits as well. Hence the term double dipping. All right, Eric, there would be conditions under Mr. Rehm's proposal, including a 6-month waiting period before officers can return to the workforce and incentives to hold off on collecting that pension while returning to work. We know that crime's a concern statewide, but is this the solution in your mind, understanding that? I know you were quite understanding of what happened the last time around when we got rid of double dipping. What's the difference here?
Bad idea. You know, let me tell you a better idea.
Okay.
3 things we could do. First of all, the city's already doing it. APD is offering $10,000 sign-on bonuses for new officers. You want to get some new folks who aren't steeped in the dysfunctional culture of APD in a lot of departments, you know, give them a reason to join up. So a lot of folks, I think that becomes it's like teachers, it becomes a real difference if they have a family, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing is, both Santa Fe and Albuquerque are doing these community safety departments. Albuquerque is really getting off the ground to really take some of that the demand for police time, for person hours of police on these, these mental health and addiction and sort of like these kind of calls that really could be taken by someone other than a uniformed officer. That's the second thing we should double down on for cities. And then the third thing, which I think is really, really important, we haven't talked a lot about. There's some folks who've had this great idea of starting to whether it's a charter school or some kind of training to get to change the culture and start getting younger kids interested in entering public safety from a much more holistic perspective, right? Not just the kids who always wanted to be a police officer and have a gun, but the folks who are thinking about, do I do teaching? Do I do, the military? Do I do give them a reason in a place where they can sort of learn some of these community skills, social work, but also law enforcement and also ethics and all these other things that you could learn. So that you kind of create a pipeline. So if you do those three things, bonuses, sign-on bonuses, expand these departments to take some of the workload off the existing officers, and then really start to create a pipeline, I think that's a much better solution than asking the old timers to come back and hey, we'll make it worth your while. You can start collecting your pension, and then you're just bouncing a lot of young people. It's really demoralizing for the department, and I also don't think it changes the culture of these departments, because the problem is, and I say this as an old guy, these old timers, we're kind of set in our ways, and if you were socialized in one of those old departments where it was, perhaps not the most progressive way to do law enforcement, that's what we're going to get more of if we bring some of these old timers back.
I appreciate that so much. It was my very first thought. I mean, these old guys coming back in, telling these younger guys how it should be done, all that kind of thing. You know how people are. It's one of those things. Rebecca, is this, just a quick question on this. I got another thing going back to double dipping. Is this a white flag? I mean, like Eric said, there's a lot of things we could do. Why do we have to take this giant leap to reach back to people who are living another life, basically, at this point?
Well, if you would have asked me how I felt about double dipping, probably, a month ago, I would have said, we are at the point where, nothing's a bad idea. By any means necessary, by all means necessary, let's get more cops. I'm a huge fan of our police. I was glad to read in the Journal that most of us are, and most of us do feel like they're doing a good job, whether we feel safe or not safe, and no matter who it is we're voting for. People seem to be generally aligned that our police officers are doing a good job. The thing is that they're not. We have. I think we will come close to 200 officers who leave the force this year from APD. And I do want to reiterate: this is an Albuquerque issue. New Mexico is not understaffed in policing. No other force is. This is an Albuquerque issue.
Excellent point.
But we're on track to lose close to 200 officers this year. So our attrition rate is higher than our graduation rate, getting folks into the academy. It's not a money issue. They're not retiring because of money. So by offering them more money to come back, they're not coming back. That's not going to change anything. We will all, if we pass this legislation, we will all walk away. We'll pat ourselves on the back and say, good job, Albuquerque. But it's not going to make a difference. It also, bringing them back, they don't come back as beat cops. They retire and they want to come back into what they were doing and get paid more money to do it. It's not that they don't deserve the more money. It's that now we're disincentivizing younger officers because you're limiting their career path. You're limiting where they can go. So I respect Representative Ream for throwing something out there. But really, because this is an Albuquerque issue, I don't think we need to take it to the legislature. I think we need to look at what is causing the culture at the city of Albuquerque to make them want to retire so soon.
Good points there. Hey, Tom, the governor won't say whether or not she supports this idea, and she has control over what issues can be added to the call, of course, during this 30-day coming up. Do you think this measure will make her call?
It has the potential. I mean, it has, from an optics perspective, it has a lot of curb appeal. It's something that will get a lot of people talking about public safety, and specifically in Albuquerque. But anyway, so I think that it does have a lot of curb appeal. Whether or not it actually makes the calls a whole other issue. Just playing off of what I've heard both Rebecca and Eric saying, I have a little bit of a different perspective. I'm okay. If people want to return to the force, let's provide a means for them to return to the force. Because, granted, will they want to return is the whole other issue, because, if they've already retired early from something, it's over a philosophical issue, not a money issue. What has changed philosophically that will get them to say, you know what, maybe I will return to the Albuquerque Police Department. Maybe I will return to, X or Y or Z. The other thing is that I like it because it provides an opportunity for institutional knowledge to come back into the police department. With a lot of new recruits, a lot of new officers, which are all very well trained. I think that, there's sometimes, having somebody who has that institutional knowledge come back in and share their insights, I think is a good thing. And, but having a process, I don't think we are hurt as a result of having a process to provide a pathway to allow some of the officers who want to return to return.
Hey, Eric, the police union spokesperson here in Albuquerque has come out against the plan, saying retired officers re-enter the workforce at higher levels. Rebecca mentioned this, therefore stunting the career progress of younger officers, but supporters see the idea. Without a move like this, we'll have to go out of state even more to find more officers to fill positions in that institutional knowledge about the community that Tom's mentioned won't be had with people coming in from the outside. Does that make sense to you where the police unions coming from?
No, but I generally have a hard time understanding where Sean Willoughby's coming from most of the time. But I have to say that I agree with him, which is rare, that we have to provide some opportunities. This is a tough job, right? Especially given everything going on. So if we want to get our best and brightest, if we want people to make this a career decision, they got to be able to support their families, and they got to feel like they have a career path, right? I think I might disagree with Sean Willoughby about, whether the Department of Justice, the reforms we're talking about should be implemented and how they should be implemented. He'd like them to go away. I think we need to really change the culture of the department. But if we use it as an opportunity to bring in a lot of new folks, the different perspective, younger folks, there's plenty of young people in Albuquerque and around the state who would love to be in a very sort of enlightened police department where they can really help the community. That's why most people go into it. People who go into it who just want to shoot folks are the people who create the bad reputation for most of law enforcement, right? We want to minimize the incentives for those folks. And we want the folks who are thinking, again, about the military, about teaching, about maybe social work, maybe thinking about like, what can I do to help my community, serve my community? And I'm from here, and I want to do that in my community. How do we make this a really good decision for them? And I think that's what we should be talking about, not about bringing back some old timers, not about bringing back people from out of state. I think we have an opportunity to really rebuild the department in a way that's going to help us kind of overcome all the challenges we've had for, frankly, a generation.
Interesting points. Hey, guys, thank you all for your research and thoughtful comments this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics The Line covered this week on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. Finally, tonight, Albuquerque City Council President Cynthia Borrego shares her thoughts on the stadium bond proposal, saying it's in the hands of the voters, as it should be.
Good evening. I'm Cynthia Borrego. I'm the City Council President. I'm also the City Councilor for the Northwest Mesa of District 5. And this evening, I'm here to talk with you a little bit about what is on the ballot for the proposed stadium. And what is on the ballot is basically an initiative as to whether or not the city moves forward on $50 million of bond money to invest and build the stadium. There would, of course, be a match from the developer if that does pass. The bond funding is basically gross receipts tax bond funds, and those are slated to build capital projects. So if the stadium initiative is voted down, then we would move forward with other types of capital development. If it's voted up, then the city would proceed to look at where the stadium is best suited. And there was a study done by the city. The city identified in that study 3 different areas that would be probably located in the downtown. But I think it's important as a city planner that we have all initiatives on the table and that we look at all areas, and that would include traffic, parking, access, socioeconomic issues, and fragility of neighborhoods. So I think it's important that we keep an eye on this referendum and determine whether or not we move forward with it or not. And my particular stance on this, because I was asked the question, is do I support a stadium? I think in the long term, as a city planner, this positions Albuquerque in probably a really good place, but it's up to the voters.
Early voting continues through Saturday, and Election Day is, of course, next Tuesday, November 2nd. A reminder that you can take advantage of same-day voter registration only in the early voting period, so don't expect to walk up next Tuesday with the idea you'll be able to register and cast your ballot. However you take part in the process, we encourage all of you to get out there and make your voice heard. We also want to take a minute to bid farewell to senior producer Matt Grubbs, who is off to his next adventure. While we are sad to see him go, we're glad he will be still impacting local journalism in his new role at KOB TV. Matt has been a valuable member of the team for the last several years, and we'll miss his thoughtful approach to covering stories that are so impactful to the entire state. We know you join us in wishing him well. So until next time, thanks for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.